This The West is Big channel is dedicated to helping you and millions of others explore the West. This is the Rio Grande Gorge and its famous bridge near Taos. From here, GPS data shows that New Mexico is splitting itself apart along the entire length of the state. It's what geologists call a rift, and it's centered on the Rio Grande. Lucky for us, these natural forces have created beautiful and varied landscapes for us to drive through and explore. There's vast white sands, trails through lava flows, and lots of evidence of past civilizations. We'll hike to a mountain peak, explore a big underground room, and drive to the top of a volcano. In between, we'll drive on a supervolcano and hike to cliff dwellings made from its ash. We'll get there on hassle-free roads, some long and straight, others twisty. And on one, there was a tumbleweed warning. Yes, that's what the weatherman said. The rift includes 3 national parks and many national monuments and state parks. They're all rich in beauty and history. And on this trip, I'll tell you how to explore over 20 of them. Most have easy trails to photo ops, even if you're in your 70s and blind. We'll meet her later. The area is just full of history, including that of our space program. And you never know what you're going to run into in New Mexico. Maybe even something out of this world. Now is the perfect time to explore New Mexico. These days, many of our western parks suffer from overcrowding, and it's hard to become one with nature when you're jammed together with 50 strangers on a park bus. And that's assuming you can even get into a park. The more popular western parks limit the number of visitors by forcing them to get multi-day reservations months in advance. So on my next adventure, I decided to tour New Mexico's less crowded parks, and they can be visited year-round. To prove it, I did the 6-day road trip twice, once in December and the other in May. I shot a lot of good stuff and ended up with a video that's rather long, so feel free to skip ahead if you get a little bored to check out the next park, which you might like better. And subscribing to the channel will make it easy to come back to it. And by the way, if you have a question or a comment, please leave it below. And I know this is very difficult and even impossible if you're watching this on a big TV. But if you want to leave a comment, and please subscribe, try doing it on your phone. It's much easier. This is a map of the route. The stops aren't exactly in a straight line, and I varied my route with each trip. If you're flying in, you can start at either El Paso or Albuquerque. Both of my trips went from south to north. And our first stop is White Sands National Park. White Sands is one of the most photogenic places in the West. I've photographed it many times, going back to the early 2000s. It covers over 200 square miles, but it has only one road, and it's just 8 miles long. And it can easily be driven in less than an hour. So why have I spent so many days here and in the little Air Force Base town of Alamogordo? Well, because of the dunes. They're always different, and you never know what's over the next dune. It's a vast, mostly trackless place, perfect for those who like to explore, or for those who like to isolate and contemplate. As always, the goal of this video is to encourage and to help you come this way too. It's located in the Tularosa Basin portion of the Rio Grande Rift, where 20,000-year-old footprints have been found. I can't take you there, but there is a nearby place where you're free to explore and discover pre-Columbian rock art. Over 20,000 of them. The park is generally open from dawn to dusk, unless there's a missile test going on at the nearby range. On this day, the rangers opened the gate a few minutes early. But one time I did have to wait over an hour because there was a missile test going on. The entrance fee is just $25 per vehicle, but if you're doing the other parks in the Rift, it's well worth buying the annual Parks Pass. The handout they give you with its map, it'll come in pretty handy, and it's worth studying because, well, it's easy to get lost in all this white. It happened to a small group on my last trip. Maps are also available for download on the park's website. This one shows important stops on the road with distance markers. There are trails here, a boardwalk trail, an amphitheater, picnic areas, and a backcountry camping area. There's also an area for horseback riding. And probably the most popular spot, the West filming area. When I get to the park early, I like to shoot the sunrise. So I stopped at the first parking area. It was for the Dune Life Nature Trail, which is a short 1-mile loop. The trails here aren't like the other trails you may have seen on my channel, like the ones in Glacier National Park. Here, they're not really trails, they're more like pathways, with post markers to keep you from getting lost. Mostly, this is a place to wander and explore, on your own, without any boundaries. And that's what makes this place unique. The sunrise wasn't bad, and I got a nice shot of the ridge behind the dunes. That ridge is where a lot of this sand comes from. If you subscribe to my channel, you know that I try to teach something about the landscape. And if you're not a member, why don't you subscribe now? Thanks. By the way, it's not a good idea to park on the road, because these guys have a job to do. There's another short trail to a playa, or dry lake, across the road. But we're going to head to the dunes. You may be wondering why the sand is white. Well, this isn't typical beach sand, which is basically quartz. This sand is gypsum, which has a lot of calcium, which is, of course, white. Before wandering through the dunes, we're going to do the Inter-Dune Boardwalk. It's the only wheelchair-accessible trail in the park. It's less than a half-mile long, and it has lots of info signs. The boardwalk is aluminum and just above the sand. The first few info signs tell us about the wildlife. Now, the only living things I've ever seen here are bugs. But I have seen a snake hole, and there are some signs that warn that there are rattlesnakes around. But again, I've never seen one. I've also seen tracks. These are likely from a kit fox, which is about the size of a small dog. They're nocturnal, but you may find some of their footprints in the morning. This sign has a message about the importance of cyanobacteria. I'm a fan of this stuff because it gave the planet our breathable oxygen. And they make cryptobiotic soil, which is the base for plant life here in the desert. It takes decades, even centuries, for these bacteria to create a thin soil that plants can use to grow. Sadly, one footstep can kill it. This is one reason dogs must be kept on a short leash. The rangers don't want them to run far afield and damage this basic building block of desert life. There are benches along the way and a shelter near the end to get out of the sun. At the far end, there's a viewpoint over the dunes and Holloman Air Force Base in the distance. There's also a series of info signs that tell us how all this gypsum got here. Turns out that millions of years ago, this area was covered by the Permian Sea. Heat from below caused the land to rise, kind of like this. And this caused the sea to recede. When the heat and pressure went away, the land went down and the sea rushed in once again. And this process happened several times. When the water was deep, dirt and clay were deposited. And when the sea went away, a gypsum layer was deposited. And if you don't believe me, look at the distant ridge. You can see the layers in the rock. When all this happened, the whole area was flat. Those mountain ridges were all at the same level as here, near sea level. And today, White Sands is 3,900 feet above sea level. It was much later when all this was uplifted, during the rifting process that created the basin between the ranges. So how did all the gypsum get here? Well, it was all locked in those rocks up in the ranges. Well, rain and snow dissolved the gypsum, and over time it all flowed down here, and of course the wind helped too. Okay, that's enough school for this episode. Our next stop is for the Sunset Stroll meeting area. It got its name because when conditions allow, a ranger leads an informative tour from here. It's generally popular and something that everyone should do at least once. I've spent more than a couple of sunsets here, and I'll show you more of those shots in a bit. But since we're here, let's walk around. The first thing you notice is how much easier it is to walk on than beach sand. It's much firmer. If you like to shoot vegetation, well, this side of the road has more plants. And some of them can tell us about erosion rates. This one started life on top of the dune. In its lifetime, the dune blew away. It just moved on, exposing its root system. The ripples were rather nice on this day, so I looked around for a place to put the camera. But this was something I wasn't the first to notice. Since they were here first, etiquette dictates that it's my responsibility to stay out of their shots. So I walked around a bit more and then headed to the other side of the road. I climbed a dune. It's a short climb, and when I got to the top, I saw rows and rows of dunes, all the way to the edge of the basin. This aircraft shot shows just how many rows there are. Again, the walking is easy. It's much easier than beach sand, and it's also cooler, which is one reason why a lot of people choose to walk in bare feet. It's time to move on now, but we'll return to this spot for the sunset show. As we head down to the loop, let's talk about the wind. On a few of my visits, it's been brutal. Pelting sand doesn't feel good on the skin, and it can turn blue skies almost white. It can also damage camera gear, which is why I shoot with an iPhone or a GoPro when there's blowing sand. They're really good at keeping the dust out. One way to get around the wind is shoot early in the morning when the wind tends to be lower. There are some benefits to high winds, though. It erases footprints. Late in the day, the dunes are covered in them. A strong overnight wind will erase them, giving us a clean canvas in the morning. Just beyond the fork in the road, there's a picnic area. And notice that each table has a windbreak. There's an amphitheater for ranger talks near the next parking area, and a view of Holloman Air Force Base from the curiously named Area 19. When we get to the bend, we can only head back to the main road. It's the turnaround point. And the first parking area is for the Alkali Flats Trail. It's really more of a route than a trail with skinny numbered markers to keep you on track. It's a 5-mile loop that takes you to an alkali flat and back, and it's anything but flat as it goes up and down the dunes. It got its name because at the far end of the loop, it takes you to an alkali flat. My first time here, the temp was 110, and I took the trail not thinking too much of the heat. I was having too good of a time. I wasn't sweaty, and maybe I was too captivated by the park to really realize what my body was going through. I wandered off the trail chasing good shots and could no longer see the markers, but I could see a salty residue on my now otherwise red arms. My one water bottle was empty, and I was feeling a little odd and also stupid. Eventually I found some footprints that might have been mine and finally found the parking lot. The trail is a 5-mile loop, and I don't know how much of it I did before finding my car, but because of the experience, I never did the trail again. The moral of the story? The altitude, dry air, and heat can affect you more than you think, especially if you've never been here before. The name on the map for the next parking area is called the West Filming Area. This is probably the most popular area in the park, and as its name suggests, it's great for photos, as you'll see in a minute. But many come here just to play on the steeper dunes found near the parking lot. Some run up the hills in bare feet. Others slide down the hills in plastic discs. This is so popular that the gift shop sells them. And the sand isn't as slippery as snow, but it looks like it's just as much fun, and of course much warmer. Others bring their gear farther afield to have some private family time. Hopefully they bring plenty of water too. In the intro, I told you that White Sands is a great park to wander around. And this is a great place to do that. These shots show you why. There are great spots to show rows of dunes. Everybody knows that you can get great shots at sunrise and sunset, but here, the dunes can even look great during the middle of the day. It may take a while, but I always look for a spot with clean ripples. And then I play with the height of the camera to fill a bunch of the frame with those ripples. I never know how much I walk in these dunes, but I'm sure it's quite a bit. And patience always helps. Sometimes I just sit and wait for the light to get right, like this person. It's a particularly good idea to do this at sunset when it might get a bit crowded and you may lose your spot. And when I find a good spot during the day, I try to come back to it at sunrise or sunset. In a place like this, it's hard to shoot a bad image. But to get a great image, you have to have great conditions and you have to find a great place. And that can take time. And that's the challenge and the hope that keeps me coming back. For example, I've never seen a horse here. But how cool would it be to capture a horse running across the dunes? Now, I know I've been talking an awful lot about photography, but I don't want to leave the impression that this place is only for photographers. It's a unique, weird, and naturally wonderful place. It's a great place for anyone, even if they just like to sit and take it all in. Most of the footage you've seen was shot in May or December, but I've been here when the midday heat is just too much and I needed a break. That's a good time to check out the visitor center or some of the attractions in nearby Alamogordo. On my December trip, there were still some COVID rules, and there was a line to get in. Inside, it's small and more of a non-profit bookstore than a visitor center. But there is a movie about the park and folks to answer questions. The gift shop is down this hall. On one of my visits, this connecting hallway was closed, and we had to go around to the back. As you can see, there was quite a line. Inside, you'll find plenty of souvenirs to buy, like souvenir pottery, and those discs we talked about, and of course, something to eat and drink. There is no restaurant, so fill your cooler with a picnic lunch. If you want to take a midday break, go into town. Alamogordo is just 15 miles to the north. By the way, when you're exiting the park, if you turn right instead of left, you'll have to go through a border control checkpoint after you make a U-turn to head back the other way. Because of the Air Force Base and the park, there are plenty of dining and hotel options for visitors in Alamogordo. There's fast food, casual dining options, as well as the largest Walmart I've ever been in. A little further up the road, there's even a winery and a pistachio farm with lots of tasty treats. If you have more time after lunch, I highly recommend a short drive to the north end of town to the New Mexico Space History Museum, even if you just have the time to see the outdoor display. I'll talk more about this place in a few minutes. So if you need a midday break, there are plenty of things to do in town before you head back to what many believe is the best time of day in White Sands: sunset. The hours before sunset are some of the park's busiest. With the light change, shadows come from the other direction, so the place looks different. At twilight, the temperature drops quickly. There's often a crowd near the sunset stroll area. If there's clouds, they add a few colors to the scene before the sun drops below the mountains. On clear days, the sunset is often even better. The West Mountains are in silhouette. In the other direction, they're aglow. It's a really interesting shared experience. And without the wind, amazingly quiet. Years ago, I took one of my favorite photos of the park here at around this time. And on moonless nights, the stars are incredible. In December, due to the shallow angle of the sun's path, twilight lasts quite a while. When darkness falls, strangers compare notes. She is from North Carolina, now going from park to park, sleeping in her car, and cooking ramen on a camp stove. And she's not the only one.
Well, my name is Jess. I go by JJ. I've been living in New York City for the past 2 years, and I went on this road trip during the pandemic with my friends. I flew out to the West, and I was been dreaming about, seeing the rest of America. And so I started planning this February. Once my lease ended in New York City, I just got a car within 2 weeks, flew to Montana because Glacier National Park is awesome, and I've been doing that since then.
She chose to go to Glacier after watching YouTube videos.
Well,
after describing mine to her, she said,
I must saw yours then.
But who knows? As I was about to ask her her story, a group of Dutch girls asked us for help. They were lost and couldn't find their car. With the help of my park map, JJ drove them to it. Eventually, a ranger drives by announcing that the park is about to close, and we have to leave. Well, that's White Sands National Park. It's a fantastic place from dusk to dawn. And I hope that you'll come here and check it out, as well as some of the other places in the Rio Grande Rift. So how many days should you stay? Well, I'd say at least 2 or 3, if for nothing else, to do a couple of sunsets. So when should you come? Well, I'd say just about any time, if you don't mind the summer heat. You may also want to plan a trip around special events, like the annual Balloon Fest, or on the rare days when rangers lead tours to Lake Lucero. It's the only way to see that part of the park. If you're going to stay a few days, you're going to need a place to stay in Alamogordo, and there are several places to choose from. I continue to support small, family-owned and run motels. The rooms are nice with a fridge and a microwave, and I get to park right next to my door, which makes for an easy load out and load in. During our midday break, I promised that we'd go back to the New Mexico Space Museum for a better look. And that's what we're going to do now. You can probably tell that I really like this place. The outdoor display is incredible. Part of the missile test range can be seen in the valley below, and these items were tested there, including this remnant of a V-2 rocket. And of course, the Apollo emergency escape system. To whatever they're testing today. This Nike missile was designed to protect our cities during the Cold War. These are sounding rockets. I don't really know what that is. These are target drones. There's also a few rocket engines, and they look like they could be used today. My favorite is the Saturn V rocket engine. 5 of these were used in the first stage to launch men to the moon in the 365-foot-high Saturn V. It's quite something to not only see it, but also touch it. It's over 50 years old and looks brand new, like it could fly today. This was at the other end of that rocket. Well, it's a mock-up. It was used to test the capsule's ability to land in the water. There's also a Mercury capsule mock-up that was used to test instrumentation placement. This is all real stuff. And this stealth fighter mock-up was used for pilots to practice egress. That's getting out of the cockpit. I can't show you much of the stuff inside, but the elevators set the tone. There's a moon rock, many spacesuits, and a jetpack simulator that was used in the space shuttle era. There's even a tribute to Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek. I never knew that he was a decorated pilot in World War II. If you're really into this stuff, there's another museum about 40 miles south of the park, at the test site base entrance. It has another great static display, including mock-ups of the first atom bombs that were developed and tested nearby. Inside, there's a lot of early rocket development displays. If you or someone in your party isn't into all this techie stuff, there is other stuff to do in Alamogordo. The wine bar people also have a pistachio farm, which in December, granted doesn't look like much, but but they have a restaurant and other tasty treats. And for you RVers and campers, there are private campgrounds, and there's a place to go boondocking between the park and the Air Force Base. For me, White Sands is the highlight of the southern end of the Rio Grande Rift Trip. The park is something everyone should see, and the variety of side trips means there's fun for everyone, including our next stop on the road trip, which is about an hour to the north. It's one of my favorite places. It's small, and I bet you never even heard of it. It's called Three Rivers Petroglyph Site. I discovered it almost by accident after my first trip to White Sands in the early 2000s. When I was driving back, I saw this sign, and since exploring should be a part of every trip, I decided to follow the arrows. I had seen a few petroglyphs in Utah's parks and in Arizona's petrified forest, but I've never been to a park that was named after them. By the way, petroglyph literally means rock carving. Three Rivers is small and littered with dark rocks, covered with thousands of ancient rock carvings. I'm not sure you can find any place with more petroglyphs in such a small area. There's also the ruins of a few homes of those who made them. It's less than an hour north of Alamogordo, and between several of the Rift's parks. So if you're doing the Rift tour, no matter which route you take, you're going to have to pass by this place. And since it's just 3 miles off the main road, you need to check it out. It has a small campground with a couple of RV hookups. The ranger in the very small visitor center accepted my All Parks Pass, gave me a park info pamphlet, told me it was legal to fly the drone, and let me know where the old village is. Most of the glyphs are near a 2-mile round-trip trail. There is no fence and just 2 rules to protect it. The next sign is a little scarier. Now, I've been here 5 or 6 times and I've never seen a snake of any kind. This bridge, it's over a dry gully. Was this one of the 3 rivers? We're heading to a ridge with lots of volcanic basalt boulders. Basalt has lots of iron and magnesium. Over time, its surface oxidizes to a dark brown patina, which can be chipped off to make pictures. Follow the sign and start going up. After just a few feet, within view of the parking lot, the petroglyphs are everywhere. Nearly every rock has at least one. The main route is along the crest of the ridge, but there are several spur trails, like this one. When you see all of these, you can't help but wonder who made them and why. Well, the area was occupied intermittently from about the year 200 through about 1450 by a people archaeologists now call the Jornada Mogollon. And I'm probably saying that wrong. They seem to come and go based on local climate conditions. When I first came here, they were known as the Anastasi, as they had been since 1927. That's now an out-of-date pejorative term, because in Navajo, it means ancient enemy. There are 11 markers for particularly important petroglyphs like this one. This one has a circle, like over 10% of the glyphs on this site. And no, I'm not going to show you all the markers. I prefer to give you the gift of discovering them for yourself. There are a couple of ways to make a petroglyph. The fast way is to use one rock to scratch another. Most of these are made the hard way, using 2 rocks, one as a hammer and the other as a chisel, and moving them around to make a picture. The main trail is pretty steep in spots, but the total elevation gain is only about 150 feet. And the glyphs are still everywhere. Some of them use bumps and rock shapes to make them more realistic. Here, a bump was used to make an eye of a bighorn sheep. And here, to make the face appear in 3 dimensions. Faces and people are frequent subjects. The faces tend to be round. Some have earrings. A few may depict hunting scenes. And maybe that's why they were made, to show status and accomplishments. There's lots of glyphs of animals of all type, large and small. There's even footprints. They think this one's a bear. Perhaps this guy was a farmer. There are also lots of geometric shapes that are likely just decorations or art. Is this proof that prehistoric people just wanted to express themselves? Just as graffiti artists do today? Who knows? Some of the designs are similar to those found on pottery of the same era. From the top, there's a nice view of the Tularosa Basin. To the east is the range that uplifted during the rifting process. Most of the basin is to the west. As we look at the north end of the Missile Range, it's frequently filled with dust devils. After a rough and tricky section on the trail, I stopped to chat with some folks. They're experienced RVers who love seeing the West. Except for her. She's blind. And she just made it up the tricky part, with a little help from her friends. So why do you do these things?
I don't want to be bored.
I tried to interview her, but the wind was just too much. She said she lost her sight when her son was a teenager, and she wanted to show him that there were no obstacles that couldn't be overcome. She walked the walk. Such encounters are the best parts of road trips. Her love of adventure is infectious and inspiring. The shelter is about a mile out. It's generally my turnaround point, though there are several trails beyond it. On hot days, it's a nice place to rest and hit your water bottle. On the way back, since you'll be looking at the other side of the rocks, you're going to see different stuff. On this trip, I missed one of my favorites on the way out, and I wanted to make sure I found it on the way back. It's one of the more famous, and it's marked by number 7. It took me a bit of a scramble, but I eventually did find it. It's the sheep with 3 arrows. It's a pretty obvious record of a hunting scene. This is my favorite of the glyphs, and I really do want to see it every time I'm here. Now that I have, it's time to head back. You can spend as much time here as you want. A quick visit can take as little as 90 minutes, but 2.5 hours is better. Of course, you can spend days here, especially if you go glyph hunting in the brush. I've seen really good photos from down in there, but I suppose that's also where the snakes live. I have one fear about doing this video. It's that too many people will come here. This is a fragile place, and it needs to be respected. With a little help from the pamphlet map, I'm going to take you on my first trip to the village site. It begins opposite the main entrance. This is the only sign, so once again, don't bring your dog. My channel includes guides to many of North America's biggest prehistoric sites. This will be my first small one. It's only a 5-minute walk. The first sign is a plea not to damage the site. Turns out the village was all around us. It was first established near the highway about 1,000 years ago, with simple pit houses, which are really just big holes with a roof. But this land was very fertile, and they got a lot more rain here back then, making it easy to grow corn, beans, and squash. And as we've already seen, there's plenty of game and fish. So the village became prosperous, providing its citizens with a rare thing for the age: free time. Lucky for us, they used it to make things like petroglyphs. And it also enabled them to grow the population, which peaked around the year 1300. Interestingly, this is not long after Chaco collapsed, perhaps due to drought. It appears that this area still had plenty of water, because the village sprawled out all the way to here. Today, the area is still largely untouched. And let's keep it that way. Just 3 rooms have been reconstructed. And if you take the right fork, this is the first. It's an example of the early pit house style, as the archaeologists found it. But you can just imagine that back in the day, this whole area was covered with houses like these. The rest of the area remains largely untouched. A little further down the trail is one of the more modern homes, and had 3 rooms. One for cooking, with a pit pantry. One for sleeping, with a gypsum floor. And the other was kind of a living room. On the eerier side of things, it was tradition back in the day to bury your family under your house. And 2 bodies were found under this one. The last ruin shows what happens to adobe over time. It returns to Earth, which is one reason why it takes a trained eye to spot a village like this. Some of you may be disappointed by the reconstructions. No, they're not as grand as European cathedrals or even some of the other pre-American sites in the Southwest. But for me, it's nice to see these in a natural state, nearly as they were when they were abandoned in the early 1400s. Perhaps that drought spread to here. No one knows where they went next, though a nearby tribe believes that they are descendants. Well, that's Three Rivers Petroglyph site. I just love this place, mostly because it's unaltered history and full of unknowns. The petroglyphs are untouched. They're everywhere. There's no fences. There's something kind of unique about that. And even these reconstructions are very simple. It's pretty much as they really were when they were found. So when you're in the area, I highly recommend take the short 3-mile detour to the Three Rivers Petroglyph site. I don't think you'll be disappointed. In this segment, we're heading to the eastern edge of the rift. From Alamogordo, it's about a 3-hour drive to Carlsbad, which is our base while visiting 2 national parks that have been pushed up by the rifting process. We'll walk through the huge Carlsbad Caverns, and then head out to the hiking mecca of Guadalupe Mountains National Park. They're both on the high eastern edge of the rift, overlooking another basin. We'll start by touring the largest cave room in North America. But there's more. We'll do a little hiking and even go off-road. From late May through October, there's an added evening attraction at the cave, a nightly bat flight, when thousands of bats leave the cave to feed on insects. And I'll help you navigate the tricky reservation system, which you need to get into the park. Being remote, they're not very crowded, which is rare for national parks these days. And this whole road trip is far enough south that you can do it any time of year. I shot a lot of this video in December. Our base is the tourist town of Carlsbad, New Mexico, which is less than an hour from both parks. We're going to spend the day at the cave first. It's just 25 minutes from the center of town. There was no lodging and only permit-required backcountry camping in the park. So I stayed in one of Carlsbad's many hotels. But if you want to be closer, there is a family resort on the park road. The road twists its way up the edge of an old oceanic reef, made of sea sponges and other creatures that lived long ago in the Delaware Sea, which today is part of the Permian Basin. In this road cut, there's a sandstone layer which is evidence of a wind-blown beach. The visitor center is 4,406 feet above sea level and about 1,000 feet above the basin. The visitor center hours vary with the seasons. They're 8 to 5 in the winter, and you can't enter the cave after 2:30. This is the largest, most feature-rich visitor center on the tour. The people at the help desk were not only helpful, but friendly, and used the brochure to point out all the things that there are to do and see, which could easily fill a couple of days. They also told me about Sitting Bull Falls, which I had never heard of. It's about an hour away, and it looks like a great photo op. When I asked about the rift, their geologist even agreed to explain the landscape on camera. You're free to wander around the visitor center, its gift shop, and its many displays. But to enter the cave, you're going to need a couple of things. An entry ticket and a reservation ticket stamped with the time of day that you're allowed to enter it. You need a reservation ticket for each member of your party, and you can get them in advance on the park's website. Well, you should be able to. I couldn't because of some sort of a systems error, which I'll explain later. You get your entry ticket here by showing your park pass or paying $15. There are 2 ways to get to the cave. The elevators are past the exhibits, which are some of the best in the park system. There's info about the creatures that lived in the reef back when all this was underwater. And of course, there's info about the bats. This scale diorama is a great way to see the whole system, with the visitor center at the top and an elevator bank which goes down 750 feet. It also shows the natural entrance, which in places is 100 feet wide and 200 feet high. It's paved with 60 switchbacks. Since I always carry equipment, I've always taken the elevator, assuming that I'd have to hike out those 750 feet if I walked down. Later, the geologist told me that the entrance might be the best part of the whole hike, and that everyone can take the elevator back up. It's about 1.25 miles long from the parking lot trailhead to where it joins the Big Room Trail, which is also 1.25 miles long. But it's a loop. And by the way, the seating for the bat flight is at the natural entrance. During the day, the bats hang out in an area separate from the trail, and people aren't allowed in the bat cave. If you're a subscriber, you know that I try to hide some science in these guides. So here goes. This cave was formed differently than most. Most are formed when rainwater from above absorbs carbon dioxide on its way down, and then it absorbs more carbon dioxide as it filters through the soil, forming a mild carbonic acid, which dissolves the limestone. But this cave was hollowed out by sulfuric acid, which pooled from below in the water table, and then it dissolved the limestone. The presence of gypsum, yes, the same stuff we walked on in White Sands, is proof that the whole area is geologically tied together. And this cave-making process occurred over a wide area. There are at least 120 caves nearby. And the hollowing out process took quite some time. The top of the cave is about 2 million years older than the lower part. Okay, school's over. Let's go to the elevators. There are several, but some are out of order. Because of COVID, each party gets their own elevator. So when they're busy, there's likely to be a line, and that's why there's a timestamp on the tickets. COVID rules are going to be flexible. When I was there, I was required to wear a mask, even when I was in the cave. This counter doesn't indicate floors, it indicates feet. It shows you how far you've dropped. And when the doors open, there was a big surprise. I was the only one there. It was actually rather eerie. I actually called out, "Hello," a few times and got no response. I was last here in 2008, and the lobby area is much different now. Back then it was crowded, and there was even a diner. You can hear my voice. Oh, there is a human here. God, I feel better. Yes, I was happy that a man appeared by its replacement. For the good of the cave, the diner is now gone. A counter with prepackaged food, helmet lights, and t-shirts. The temperature is 56 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, and I was wearing a fleece jacket. At first it was a bit eerie, but then I realized that the emptiness of the cave was an odd gift, likely caused by a National Park Service website mix-up. In non-COVID times, there are special ranger-led tours to chambers that are out of bounds on the self-guided tour. But on my visit, I was restricted to the 1.25 mile Big Room Trail. This trail, too, is paved and even has railings, so you don't wander off in the dark. I'd say the lighting is appropriate, dim, but not too dim. And by the way, the trail is designed for wheelchairs. I've been in a few other caves, and the first thing I noticed about this one was, well, everything's pretty much the same color. And it's dry. There's no water dripping down or off the walls. So these formations aren't growing. It's a dead cave. Okay, now that we've seen a little bit of the cave, let me tell you the story about the park website. A couple of days before I arrived, I called the park and asked about ticket availability and COVID rules. I was told I shouldn't have any problem getting in on my weekend visit, but the tickets are only valid for a particular hour on a particular day. So I couldn't get my ticket then because I didn't know when I would be there. So I waited till the day before to try to buy my ticket. When I visited the website, it said that no reservation tickets were available for the entire Saturday. Now what to do? I was staying in Carlsbad, so on Saturday morning while in my hotel room, I checked the website and it said that no tickets were available for the entire weekend. I decided to head to the park as early as possible, in hope that I could talk my way in or benefit from a cancellation. As we've seen, the website was catastrophically wrong, and no one at the park knew why the website said there were no tickets available. The moral of the story is always call the local number for the park, not the toll-free one, which is in Washington. Call the local number to get the real story. Anyway, as is typical of caves, everything is a bit weird looking. What is atypical? This room is so big that you never feel closed in, even with all the spiky stalactites coming off the ceiling. They formed after the water table dropped and left us with big empty spaces. It was a long time ago, when the local climate was cooler and wetter than now. That water seeped through the rock above, absorbing minerals and carbon dioxide as it did. When the water reached the cave, the CO2 escaped, forming a little bit of a mineral called calcite in each drop. When the water evaporated, only a tiny bit of calcite remained. Each formation in here represents billions of drops of water. How the water dripped, dropped, and flowed explains why there are so many different types of formation in the cave. We know that stalactites come from above, they're hanging on the ceiling. Stalagmites grow from the bottom up. And here they get very big. Soda straws are kind of hard to pick out, but they have holes going through the center, where water once flowed through. And much of the rocks on the walls look like they're liquefied. This is called flowstone. It forms when water flows over the surface. Many of the walls and other features are covered with stuff that looks like popcorn. It forms when water evaporates in place instead of dripping or flowing. It's also made up of a slightly different mineral, which is chemically the same but has a different organization. This is the view from Caveman Junction. It's a shortcut that bypasses the far loop, which is where I've shot some of my best shots in the cave. Many of the formations have names. This is called the Chandelier. This one was on the cover of the Dallas Morning News travel page. The trail back to the elevators is just as interesting. There are more named formations this way. This is the Rock of Ages. The trail then passes the painted grotto, on its way back to the main lobby. There were a few people in the lobby when I got back, but not many. And there was no line for the elevator, unlike when I was here in 2008. I spent about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours down here, and a lot of that was spent just taking it all in. The trail is only 1.25 miles long, but I did stop several times along the way. But if you take the natural entrance, the total distance is twice as long. Even if you don't have to go, take the walk to the restroom. It's through a small, natural winding cave. It's quite interesting. And many of the 120 nearby caves are quite similar. How's this for a cliche? When you get to the top and the elevator opens, it exits through a gift shop. Well, a smaller one that they call the bookstore. I did make a pass through the big gift shop to get another fridge magnet and a sticker for my camera case. On the way out, I decided to do one of the above-ground trails. It's short but leads to a nice viewpoint. And since this is a reef, I looked for fossilized creatures on the ground. If they were there, I didn't see them. And while shooting this landscape, I saw a gravel road. Turns out it's a 9-mile, one-way loop. It's smooth enough for just about any car, and it's a good way to see the vast desert on this old reef. So that's Carlsbad Caverns National Park, conveniently located near the town of Carlsbad, where I'd spend one more night before heading to Guadalupe Mountains National Park. Guadalupe Mountains National Park is the second park near Carlsbad. It's actually in Texas. I only went to it because, well, I was close to it. I had no idea it's a spectacular hiking spot. Its many summit trails have spectacular views from 3,000 feet above 2 basins. It's 30 minutes down the road from Carlsbad Caverns, on the Texas border, about 50 miles from the town of Carlsbad, New Mexico. It's one of the least visited national parks, apparently because hikers don't know about it. Until now. It has rugged trails to 4 of the highest peaks in Texas. But it's a national park because of its unique geology. Students and researchers from around the world come here to study Permian sea creatures and energy-bearing geology. It's one of the best places in the world to do both. It's part of the same 400-mile-long reef that makes up Carlsbad Caverns. The reef formed in an inland sea during the time of the supercontinent Pangaea. Much more recently, 3,000 feet of it was exposed due to uplift during the rifting process, which exposed fossils and gave us amazing trails that can be hiked year-round. It's a large park, and you'll need a vehicle to get around it. Its main visitor center, campground, and, well, several trailheads are at Pine Springs. Up the road a bit, there's Frejole Ranch, which has a small museum and short trails with lots of spring water. McKittrick Canyon's a little farther away, and it has day-use trails, and it's very popular in the fall. Dog Canyon is 2 hours away. It's really remote, with just 9 camping spots and a few day hikes. And if you're a photographer not into hiking, well, you're really going to like Salt Basin Dunes. It's a mini White Sands, and hopefully you've seen my segment on that incredible place. But this place has something extra, seasonal flooding, which makes for great photo ops. Like other parks on the tour, there isn't a lodge or even a restaurant here, though there are 2 visitor centers. Again, Pine Springs is the main one. There are just 40 campsites, plus the backcountry permit-required sites. We're going to start our tour at Pine Springs, and it's where the rangers collect the fee, issue backcountry permits, and answer questions, though they didn't want to be on camera. It's a great place to learn about the park. There are a couple of geology walls, and a wildlife display featuring the park's 3 climate zones: desert, mountain, and riparian, which I had to look up, and it means places with water, meaning the springs. And I didn't see any wildlife at all on either of my trips in May or December. The geology exhibits feature rocks of the Permian Basin. This is a sample of the limestone that often acts as an impermeable cap rock. This rock is where oil comes from. It's a dolomite of tightly packed sand grains, but there's space between each grain, and in the Permian, that space is full of oil or gas. It looks and feels solid, and incredible pressures are required to get the oil out. Another wall has samples of rocks from the time of Pangaea, when this area was under the center lobe of an inland sea called the Delaware Basin. It's a reminder that the Earth is constantly changing. And of course, they have things to buy, souvenirs, and very little food, though. But they do have the hiker's favorite, moleskin, to prevent blisters. Outside, there's a place to sit, and info signs that explain why these ordinary-looking rocks are anything but. It has a view of one of the highest peaks, El Capitan. It's been a landmark for travelers for hundreds of years. A nearby trail will take you there. Throughout our Rio Grande Rift tour, we've seen how crustal expansion creates basins and ranges. This park has both. The trails to the 4 peaks are obviously in the range. But less than an hour away, on a road that's an adventure in itself, there's a basin that's about 2,000 feet lower than the Pine Springs Visitor Center. At just 3,600 feet, mineral-rich runoff from the mountains has collected for millions of years. Hopefully you'll remember from the White Sand segment that there's salt and gypsum layers in those mountains, thanks to the old Permian Sea. There's no drainage out of the basin, so summer heat evaporates the water, leaving only a salt flat and gypsum dunes. I've seen some amazing photos of it during the seasonal floods, and that's the main reason I wanted to come to the park. Unfortunately, it's been closed, and I couldn't get a good answer as to why or when it will reopen. I've hiked hundreds of miles in the mountains, and I've never heard of a trail being closed because of high winds. Until now. The west wind from the mountains often rushes down the ridge at 30 or more miles an hour. On this May Day,
Just high winds? 70 mile an hour gusts down here. It's 80 up in the high country.
the rangers were concerned about backcountry campers and closed the trails to the highest peaks. There's limited cell coverage, which makes it hard to distribute a warning. So anyway, I couldn't go on a big hike this trip. Being remote and with a base elevation over 5,700 feet, you would think this would be a great spot to shoot the stars. Well, at times it is. But the wind filled the sky with dust. Even on a moonless night, yes, I timed the trip that way, there were few stars for good astrophotography. There was just too much dust obscuring the stars. I've hiked all over the West, but never considered hiking here. And that was a mistake. There's lots of good trails that are easy, and there's several rather difficult summit trails. Like the 8.4-mile Guadalupe Peak Trail that rises about 3,000 feet to 8,751 feet above sea level, the highest point in Texas. It's rugged with no water, and the rangers recommend that you carry at least a gallon in the summer. And in the winter, it can get a little hairy. But this park is a great place to get into summiting, because the summits aren't all that high, compared to, say, a 14er in Colorado. The park's website has lots of info on its trails, and not just the 4 strenuous peak trails. There are several hiking hubs, including the Pine Springs area, Frijole Ranch, McKittrick Canyon, and Dog Canyon. The park's website is a great resource. At first glance, the relatively short Devil's Hall looks easy-ish, with just over 500 feet of up. It turns out it's tricky, requiring good scrambling skills, especially after a rain. The website even mentions search and rescue procedures, so it's not as easy as it looks on paper. Frijole Ranch has a couple of easier trails, and some trails for horses. There are a couple of springs around here which brings in various types of wildlife. The Mazanita Spring Trail is the only wheelchair-accessible trail in the park. It's only a half a mile out and back, and it leads to a pretty pond. If you're looking for a little longer trail, the Smith Spring Loop Trail is a 2.3-mile loop with maples, oaks, and maybe even a deer or two. The McKittrick Canyon area is a little farther away. It has its own unstaffed visitor center. This canyon is very well known for its fall color. Its 0.9-mile nature loop is a great way to explore the Chihuahuan Desert climate zone. Then there's the Permian Reef Trail. It's an 8.4-mile round trip with over 2,000 feet of elevation gain. This is a great place for budding geologists, as it has markers that are described in a geology guidebook that's available in the Pine Spring Visitor Center. And if you're a photographer, the ridgetop has great views of the canyon. Another advantage to this park is the uncrowded trails can be hiked year-round. When I was here in December, the weather, apart from the wind, was great. A few weeks later, a Facebook post showed that the Guadalupe Peak Trail was covered in snow. But there's little of that in the spring and fall, and that's when the park is busiest. So again, this is a great place to go hiking, especially if you're in great shape, and the website will help you explore it. Since the Salt Basin Dune area was closed, I decided to drive to a spot where the El Paso Highway crosses a small piece of it. When I saw that dust devil off to the right, I knew I was getting close. I braved the winds just long enough to get a few shots. Humans have come here for generations, and a local historical marker says Native Americans and local Hispanics came here for the salt, and everything was okay until the 1870s, when El Paso businessmen fought them for the right to mine the salt. In the end, the salt was no longer free. They had to pay the businessmen. Well, that's my take on this rarely visited national park. I've learned it's a fantastic hiking spot for those fit enough to take it on. It's also a great place to learn about Earth history. And if you're a photographer, It's a great place to capture landscapes that few others have seen. I came here because it's close to Carlsbad Caverns and the parks of southern New Mexico. But now I know it's a great year-round destination, and we don't have to wait till summer to climb a mountain. There are 3-hour or so drives back to the Rio Grande. You can go through El Paso, or you can climb to over 9,000 feet and stop at the quaint tourist town of Cloudcroft. Or you can take the long way, through Roswell. I had done the first two, so on my last visit, it was time to go through Roswell and tour its UFO museum. Aliens apparently are very good for business. This Dunkin' Donuts went all in. The local McDonald's is in the shape of a spaceship, and there's aliens milling about. Of course, there's souvenir shops, but the UFO museum is the big draw. Because they were working on the floors, I got in for just $3. And weirdly, they let me film. I even live streamed a 15-minute visit. It's still available on my channel. There's lots of framed articles on the walls about the famous 1947 event when an alien spacecraft allegedly crashed nearby. The Air Force, of course, had a different explanation. One wall is dedicated to stories about people who claim to have been abducted. There's some pretty cool models of some alien spacecraft, too. There's also a reading room full of books on the 1947 event, as well as many other alien encounters. And yes, I did go to the gift shop to get another magnet. I didn't stay long, but it was certainly worth $3. I can finally say that I've been there, and yes, it's a little kitschy, but these people really believe. Just seeing how decked out the whole town was, and the alien theme, was also kind of fun and made the trip worthwhile. So far, we visited the parks in southern New Mexico. In this segment, we're going to start our drive west and north. Our first stop is the Valley of Fires BLM area. It's about an hour and a half from Roswell. After starting out flat, the road gets interesting as it crosses the Sierra Blanca mountain range, where it merges with the Sacramento Mountains, through Lincoln County. If on your trip you bypass Roswell, it's just 35 miles north of Three Rivers. The Valley of Fires, plural, should not be confused with the Valley of Fire, singular, near Las Vegas. This one got its name because of its fiery volcanic origin. It's near an historic town that was often visited by Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett, back when it was an important railroad and mining town. And if you have the time, I highly recommend that you explore the nearby ghost town of White Oaks, which is where they made their living. 4 miles west is the youngest lava field in North America. Between 2,000 and 5,000 years ago, Hawaii-like lava spewed from at least one vent and flowed for 44 miles. In places, it's up to 165 feet thick. And lucky for us, the BLM made a recreation area out of a high spot surrounded by all this olivine basalt. It has 20 campsites, most with RV hookups, a nature trail, and a small visitor center with trail maps, and one less refrigerator magnet. All this volcanism is, of course, a part of the rifting story. In the White Sand segment, we learned that the rifting began 30+ million years ago. A hot plume of magma rose from the mantle and pushed the area up, kind of like this rising pumpkin bread. Eventually, the top splits down the middle and later drops. But more material is pushed up and out, building a mountain range on either side of the rift. It looks remarkably like the range we saw at Three Rivers. The drop in the middle made it easier for the lava to reach the surface. And that's what it did. It flowed over the surface in at least 2 events for more than 2 decades. I was planning on blazing my own trail in the lava field. It's one of the great things about BLM sites. You can just wander around as you wish. And I also saw this little trail on Google Earth. But once I was here on the ground, I couldn't find it. The scale and randomness of all the rocks was much more challenging than I expected. Apparently the same was true for the Spanish, because they named this place Malpais, which I'm sure I'm pronouncing wrong. It means badlands, or bad footing. After I had lunch at one of the picnic tables, I decided to take you around the 1-mile paved Malpais Trail to get a good look at all this weird lava. It starts near a shelter with a viewpoint and an info sign that tells you where the lava came from. It has a steel pipe that points to Little Black Peak, which is a barely 100-foot tall cinder cone volcano. And weirdly, the lava didn't come out of its top. It came out of a vent near ground level. Another sign had a trail map, which I managed to shoot but not read for some reason, so I went the wrong way around. There's also a map on the site's brochure, which I was able to download. No, I'm not going to show you all 14 of the special places. You'll have to come here yourself to see them all. There's no bad footing on this trail. It was designed for wheelchairs, with a very gentle slope. After the switchbacks, the trail hugs the edge of the lava flow. By the way, the temp on this December day was in the 60s. It was windy, but quite pleasant. The trail heads into the flow at this huge rock pile. Again, you have to be here to understand the scale of it. And remember, this thing was molten. It was incredibly hot. It was radiating heat and moving until it bumped against this rise. And this caused that once flat surface to tilt. It has amazing folds, crags, and ripples. And those ripples have a fancy Hawaiian name, Pohoihoi. From here, the trail goes right over the lava field. It goes up and down with the contours of the flow. We're now approaching trail marker 13. It's near a likely collapsed lava tube. Hard to really see where the tube was, but it's pretty much in that ditch. The other side looks a little bit more like a tube, part of the broken roof, which has been tilted nearly 90 degrees. There are intact tubes in this huge field, and they could have been used as shelter by early humans. Life is hard here, even for the very hardy juniper tree. This one is dead, but it's still a part of the ecosystem, providing food and shelter for birds and insects. As we walk along, many of you will think, well, this is just a big pile of boring black rock. Well, to appreciate it, at least once, stop and take a good look. Really think about how it got here. It started deep in the mantle, and reaching the surface was just the first part of the journey. When it first came out of that vent and joined a boiling rock river, it took miles for it to flow to here, until it finally stopped. It's really more amazing than boring when you think about it. This live juniper tree is 400 years old, and there's lots of yucca. To early Americans, this place was like a Home Depot. The yucca leaves could be weaved into floor mats and bedrolls. The wood, of course, could be burned for heat. Some of the plants provide seeds that can be eaten, and these rocks could be used to grind them into flour. If you look at Google Earth's map, the place looks black and barren. But when you're here, this place is anything but barren. The rough surface has so many places for seeds and water and dirt to collect that it's perfect for the right type of plants to find a home. Eventually, their roots, along with time, will break down all this rock into soil. As I was walking along, I just had to stop here. This is a great example of Pohoihoi, that ropey, ripply rock with that Hawaiian name. Before we leave the lava field, this info sign is an important reminder that there are those who came before us. The Mescalero Apache used to call this area home. They were placed on a nearby reservation in the 1870s. It took less than 30 minutes to do this trail, and I found it very rewarding. It's pretty amazing that we can see all of this huge basalt lava field, and you can do it without going all the way to Hawaii. Well, I hope you enjoyed our little tour of Valley of Fires. It's another great stop in the rift, and it's the easiest way to see a huge lava field without going all the way to Hawaii. We're going to make one more very quick stop before Albuquerque, because this road provides access to the Trinity site, which is where the first atomic bomb was tested. On the way, we're going to climb the west ridge of the Tularusa Basin and enter the Albuquerque Basin. There's no white sand or basalt in this one. It's very flat and empty, pretty much as it was in 1945. You can only get to Ground Zero as part of an officially sanctioned tour, and they only have them a couple of times a year, and the tickets are very hard to come by. The best and brightest of the United States designed and built the first atomic bombs in Los Alamos, north of Albuquerque. They chose a desolate site south of this historical marker to test it. Their work brought an end to World War II. Now we're going to head west until we cross the Rio Grande. Then we'll go north to Albuquerque, but not for the city life. We're going to a couple of places that I hadn't been to before. The trails at Petroglyph National Monument and the Adobe Village at Coronado History State Park. Petroglyph National Monument is on the edge of a volcanic escarpment where ancestral Pueblo people made over 20,000 petroglyphs. Earlier in the series, we went to a BLM site called Three Rivers. It's one of my favorite places. This is a much more prestigious national monument, so it's even bigger. But first, some background. New Mexico has a long history of human occupation. We've already seen 16,000-year-old footprints at White Sands. And the Clovis culture, discovered in Clovis, New Mexico, goes back 13,000 years. And the famous spear points found in Folsom, New Mexico, in the northeast part of the state, are almost as old. Starting in the 7th century, large settlements were built out of stone in the area that we now call the Four Corners. But by the late 1200s, these centers of culture were abandoned, and nobody really knows why. They think it may have been due to drought. And many of the former residents may have walked the 100-plus miles to the Rio Grande in search of water. Because around 1300, the population in this area really grew. The National Monument has 5 separate locations. I went to the visitor center first. This guy was the greeter. He was the mask police. I shot this in December of 2021. It turns out there are no trails here and no petroglyphs. But there is a very well-spoken interpretive ranger named David Arellano, and he's going to tell us about this place.
We are at Petroglyph National Monument. We're a national park site here on the west side of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we have over 20,000 petroglyphs. Petro means rock and glyph is carving. So petroglyphs are rock carvings. And of course, the Southwest here is known for petroglyphs. And again, we have a lot of them. All of our petroglyphs are carved into a basalt. It's called basalt. It's a type of lava rock. And we have volcanoes here. On the western side of the park, we have 5 fissure volcanoes. And where those fissures were, or cracks in the earth, is where all the lava rock came out. A series of flows took place around 200,000 years ago and created this volcanic landscape. And of course, much, much later, native people, specifically the ancestral Pueblo, started carving petroglyphs here. Most of our petroglyphs were carved between 1300 and around 1680. And petroglyphs are not a language as we understand a language. They were definitely communicating things. The ancestral Pueblo were definitely using petroglyphs as a form of communication. A lot of that communication were spiritual in nature, and they had really deep held beliefs having to do with volcanoes. It was part of their origin stories and their belief system. And so volcanoes were seen as a sacred place. And it's not by chance that they decided to leave their petroglyphs, again, many of which are spiritual in nature, here in large concentrations. Even people that live in the Southwest often don't know the difference, for example, between a petroglyph and a pictograph. A pictograph is a painting on rock. And again, petroglyphs are rock carvings. And what makes the Southwest really known for petroglyphs is that here in the desert environment, there's something called a desert varnish. It's like a patina that forms on the outside of the rock over a long period of time, literally thousands of years. The outside of the rock gets dark, and in the case of basalt is more natural color is gray, but it then over time this dark, it's almost like a rust quality forms on the outside of the rock. But native people determined probably several thousand years ago that if they remove that top surface, they get into the lighter more natural gray color of the rock, and that's what creates the contrast. That's how we're able to see these images. So there's no paint involved at all, and the weathering process will continue, and that's a rough way of we can sort of date petroglyphs is how faded they are. But that's not an exact science. It's certainly not anything to the degree of, say, carbon dating, where you're able to really kind of pinpoint a range.
So tell me about the different sites. There's nothing really at the visitor center.
Right here at the visitor center, we have a small gift shop and a film that we show. That's really it's really kind of native voices. It's from contemporary Pueblo people's perspective on the significance of this site and the significance of petroglyphs. And then you drive to one of the 3 petroglyph viewing sites, and then on the western side again we have the volcanoes, and there's no petroglyphs there, but there's about 3.5 miles of trail, and you're hiking among the what are locally known as the Three Sisters, the 3 largest volcanoes here. We have cinder cones and spatter cones, and they are small volcanoes. So fissure volcanoes are referred to as monogenic volcanoes, meaning they're kind of a one-shot deal. We believe most of our volcanoes, again, they were active around 200,000 years ago, which in geologic terms is actually not very long. And so up here in the high dry desert, there's a lot of features, geologic and volcanic features that are very well preserved. So our fissure volcanoes here are associated with the Rio Grande Rift, and that's a stretching of the surface of the Earth that starts in southern Colorado and then stretches out into Texas. So it's a big swath of area, and that stretching has created. That stretching of the surface of the Earth has put us in closer contact with magma, which is usually really deep into the Earth. It's put us in closer contact with that. So there's more susceptibility of that magma coming out. And there is a number of volcanic fields that are like us that are associated with the Rio Grande Rift. Most of our petroglyphs, we believe, were carved between 1300 and around 1680. It's considered the Pueblo IV period. So it's really after the story of Mesa Verde, the story of Chaco Canyon. It's kind of the next stage where Pueblo people, ancestral Pueblo people, were leaving the Four Corners area and often connecting with other culturally similar groups that were already here on the Rio Grande River, but they were really developed. Those populations really swelled starting in around 1300, and they were coming from, again, the Four Corners area. So that's a kind of loose story. Because
there's more water here.
Well, there's lots of reasons that researchers and archaeologists believe that the ancestral Pueblo were leaving the Four Corners area, and certainly water is central to often those theories. It's not by chance that many of the settlements that ancestral Pueblo settled in were along the Rio Grande here, and we think most of our petroglyphs were carved by people that were living in a pueblo that was along the Rio Grande, only a couple of miles from here. And they were coming up here for spiritual reasons having to do with the volcanoes. They were also hunting, and there's a lot of depictions of wildlife that they were hunting, as well as in some cases specifically hunting scenes that they were depicting in the form of petroglyphs. And they were probably also gathering some plants here. They were also growing corn here. They were farmers, the ancestral Pueblo. And in some cases they were growing corn around the escarpment, creating little terraces that were catching water and building up soil. And then so they were coming here for that purpose as well. There's only one area of the monument, which is called Boca Negra, the most accessible site that does not allow for pets. But pets will, if they're not on a leash, they'll run off, they'll chase wildlife. This is a pretty harsh desert environment. We don't really want to add stress to the wildlife here, which are really eking out a survival. We have 2 types of rabbits, 2 types of squirrels that live primarily in this, what's called the escarpment here, this volcanic escarpment, which is basically the end of the lava flow. And all these boulders create little crevices and cracks where those animals, those rodents, can live and hide under. But it's a hard existence. So Dogs, unfortunately, will get all excited and race after them. They'll also race up the escarpment after these animals, and that creates erosion problems. The escarpment's very, very susceptible to erosion, and we don't want to create an additional erosion, because then eventually the boulders with petroglyphs on them can actually become unstable and fall over. And then also dogs can get into, they can be aggressive, they can scare young people, etc. The other problem is that the monument is entirely filled with coyotes, and there's many examples of coyotes attacking and taking pets, dogs that are off leash, and we've never had it happen with any animal that's on a leash. Coyotes generally will avoid people.
What about their urine?
Well, that can also be a problem. They'll start digging after an animal. They could urinate, and then that could throw off some wildlife. But it's more the digging and chasing animals that's a real issue for us. The 3 petroglyph viewing sites are all a little different, but they all have very good petroglyphs, and I don't know if you want me to go into the specifics of the different sites, but
No, I'll take it from here. Boca Negra is just a couple of miles up the road, and dogs are not allowed at this one. And while we drive there, I should probably tell you that, well, you should do what I didn't do. That is, go to the park's website. I've been to over half the national parks, and I still don't do this enough. It's a great way to learn about the park, its trails, and its hours of operation. It's there that I learned that this is the easiest place to see petroglyphs. There are several near the trailhead. It takes about an hour to hike all 3 of the connecting trails, and you'll see about 100 petroglyphs along the way. The park closes at 4:30, so plan accordingly. And one more thing. The trail up the escarpment is steep and rough. It may be too much for some people. That's all I'm going to show you of the trail because, well, I don't want to ruin it for you. But remember, if you don't have much time, this is the easiest and fastest place to see petroglyphs. We're now going to go to Piedras Marquetas Canyon. It's about 4 miles from here and 6.5 miles from the visitor center. Okay. Dogs are allowed on a leash as long as it's only 6 feet long. There are about 400 petroglyphs around the trails here, including the famous rock with all the hands. The first glyphs are about a 1/4 mile down the trail, which is 1.5 miles round trip. And once again, I don't want to show you everything, but here's a few examples of what you'll see. Now we're going to the Rinconada Canyon site. It's the closest to the visitor center, but it's where the glyphs are farthest away from the trailhead. The trail is a 2.2-mile sandy loop in a little valley, and you never have to climb the escarpment. After several minutes of walking on hard-packed sand, I still hadn't seen any glyphs. If I had been to the website, I would have known that the first of about 300 are 3/4 of a mile down the trail, near the boxed end of the canyon. Here's some of what you'll see. This is a popular spot for locals, and it has the longest hours. The gate is open from sunrise to sunset. By the way, there is water at the visitor center, and it can get really hot here. But there is no water at any of the trail sites. And by the way, the elevation is about 1 mile high at 5,200 feet. Now that we've seen the 3 petroglyph sites, it's time to go to the Volcano site. As the crow flies, it's close to the visitor center, but it's about a 12-mile or 20-minute drive to get there. The gate is open from 9 to 5. There are several connecting trails that total about 3.5 miles. I'd advise picking up a map at the visitor center to plot a short stroll or up to a 3.5-mile hike. But if you didn't do that, at least take a look at the sign near the trailhead. This is a vast treeless area, and by law, bicycles are not allowed, and you must stay on the trail. Again, dogs must be on a leash and kept at least 8 feet away from rattlesnakes, which sounds like good advice for us all. Well, that's Petroglyphs National Monument. It's really 4 parks in one. To me, petroglyphs are little time capsules that really make you think about the people who carved each one with another rock. Why did they do it? To show the world what they hunted? Or what they looked like? Or simply to let everyone know that they were there. We'll never know exactly what they were trying to communicate, but that's a big part of the fun of a place like this. Now we're going to a nearby place where some of those who carved the petroglyphs likely lived. It's a state park, and unlike a national monument, it's legal to fly over it. It's called Coronado Historic Site, which is weird because its main feature is the ruins of a pueblo of the Tewa people. Pueblo people and the Spanish play a significant role in New Mexico history. And at this place, you can learn about both. It's located near Highway 550 north of Albuquerque. Ancestral Pueblo people have been living in the area for thousands of years. In about 1300, they started building here, perhaps due to an influx of new residents who migrated here from what we now call the Four Corners area. They called themselves the Tewa. They were prosperous farmers and hunters when Francisco Coronado came through in 1540. He was looking for the 7 cities of gold and the fame that Cortez had received after conquering Mexico just a few years earlier. This place is much bigger than the village we saw in episode 2. This one had about 1,200 rooms, enough to impress the Spanish. There were 3 plazas and several ceremonial kivas. It was later named after the Tewa word for evergreen, Qua'awa. And sorry if I butchered that pronunciation. The site became New Mexico's first state park in 1935. An excavation of the 10-acre site started that same year. As you can see from this sketch of the excavation, there's much more to it than what we see above ground today. Most of the structures were reburied after the excavation to protect them. Only one of the 3 plazas is visible today. The visitor center also has a number of exhibits about the Tewa, Coronado, and the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. This was an important event in New Mexico history, especially for the Native Americans, and I wish I knew more about it. There are also displays in front of the visitor center, and a few picnic tables with a great view of the Rio Grande. The Tewa planted crops in the river bottom below. Out back there's a paved trail that loops past the reconstructed rooms. There's info signs along the way to tell you about the Tewa people. This square kiva was designed to look like the one they found the murals in. Today they're preserved in the visitor center, but no one is allowed to photograph them. In this kiva you can actually enter, but only with one of the park's guides. Most of the kivas I've seen at other sites in the Southwest have been round, and they had some round ones here too. So why is such an historic Native American site named after Coronado, a Spanish conquistador? Well, a sign on the trail kind of has the answer. It's because when the park was established, the archaeologists thought that Coronado had stayed there, and that was good enough for them to name it after him. They had no proof until the last few years, when a large archaeological metal detector survey found parts of a crossbow, nails, and pieces of chainmail. They believe that this is evidence of a battle. The place was abandoned in the late 1600s, perhaps because of a 20-year drought, or maybe that revolt had something to do with it. Residents likely moved to one of the nearby pueblos of Santa Ana or Sandia, as they claim their ancestors came from here. I've been to quite a few prehistoric native sites, and this is the first one I've seen where adobe was used. Adobe tends to turn back into soil, and this part of the site, near where the East Plaza was, has been reconstructed to look as it did in the 1800s. The real buildings, or at least their foundations, are still buried beneath. There's a $7 entry fee, and the hours are limited. It closes around 4:30, and they're closed on Tuesday. And all this information, of course, is available on the park's website. And yes, ironically, that is an Indian casino in the background. It only takes about an hour to see the Coronado history site. If you're doing the whole Rio Grande Rift road trip, or if you just happen to be in Albuquerque, this place is well worth the visit. It's one of the few places you can learn about both the Pueblo people and their first contact with the Spanish, which of course wasn't always pleasant. Coronado didn't stay long. Because he didn't find any gold, he went back to Mexico in 1542. 40 years later, the Spanish were back. They forced a Pueblo people that happens to be on our way to our next stop to convert to their religion, and in 1621 to build the Jemez Mission. It's one of the oldest churches in North America. It's located on a nice driving road that goes through the quaint and tourist-friendly Jemez Pueblo. It's a nice little surprise as we near the end of our road trip. Welcome back. This is part 6 and the last segment of our New Mexico road trip through the Rio Grande Rift. We're going to pick up where we left off at the Jemez Historic Site. We'll wind our way to a super volcano before visiting Bandelier National Monument. Then we'll head north to see where New Mexico is splitting apart. Before our last stop in a field of volcanoes, we'll even climb one. We'll go through Santa Fe and Taos along the way. Our first stop is 30 minutes up a winding road to a super volcano. Well, its crater, which is called a caldera. It's smaller than a Yellowstone supervolcano, but still the Valles caldera is over 13 miles across. It's so big that when you're next to it, it looks nothing like a volcano. And guess what? We're driving on it. It covers 89,000 acres, and that clearing is just a small part of it. Those mountains aren't the edge either. They're younger volcanic domes near the center of the caldera, and one is over 11,000 feet tall. You need a little help from Google to see just how big this place is. And by the way, it's one of our youngest national preserves. This is the view from the Valles Grand Pullout on Highway 4. It's one of several meadows, and its elevation is about 8,000 feet. And this is really what you're going to see at this park. It's mostly undeveloped, with a few hiking and biking trails, and lots of wildlife viewing. There's even bears. The valleys, or meadows, are remarkably peaceful. But 1.6 million years ago, that wasn't the case. That's when a bunch of smaller volcanoes combined to form one super one, resulting in an eruption that spewed 75 square miles of ash and molten rock. If you're old enough to remember the Mount St. Helens eruption, it spewed out less than a half a cubic mile of material. So this thing really was super. In places, several hundred feet of ash cooled to become the perfect material to make cliff dwellings. Volcanoes can form obsidian, and starting about 11,000 years ago, man found it here, and started using it to make arrow points and knives. The Park Service even made a trail to one of the obsidian pit mines. I had to save the hike for next time, because I was due at the cliff dwellings at Bandelier. It's about a 45-minute drive, but I decided to go through Santa Fe, which added an hour to the trip. I hadn't seen Santa Fe in a while, and boy has it grown. Even in the off-season, it was crowded and expensive. In the historic part of town, it seems every building is a gallery of some sort, which of course is one of the main attractions. After a quick lunch stop, I continued on my way to Bandelier National Monument. It's a pleasant drive to the main gate. In the off-season, the park road is open from dusk to dawn. In December, the gate wasn't even manned. During the busy season, which varies, personal cars are only allowed in the early morning and late afternoon to reduce traffic and overcrowding. You got to check with the park's website for details because the dates in which they do this varies. In the busy season, during the rest of the day, you have to take a shuttle bus into the park. And it leaves from a visitor center near the town of White Rock, which is several miles away. The park road starts on Pajarito Plateau, and not far from the gate there's a nice view of Frijole Canyon, which is where the cliff dwellings are. There's a short walk to the viewpoint, where there's even a couple of spotting scopes. And one is designed for those in wheelchairs. One of the info signs describes the volcanic landscape. The other one talks about how forest fires create diverse habitat, which is a good thing. The visitor center and cliff dwellings are on the valley floor, at the far end of the canyon. The 3-mile drive to the gate to the visitor center is a pretty one. And by the way, pets are allowed only in the visitor center parking lot and not on any of the trails. The elevation at the visitor center is almost 6,100 feet. And if you're a flatlander, you may feel the altitude. And the effects of altitude are even greater in the summer. On a 90-degree day, the air density is equivalent to being at about 9,000 feet. And of course, the air is also very dry. So if the altitude doesn't get you, be sure to drink enough water to avoid dehydration. There was plenty of parking when I arrived. In the 1930s and 40s, there was lodging here, but not anymore. Now there's just a store and a cafe where they serve snacks. During the busy times, this is where the shuttle will drop you off. And there are rangers here to answer questions and to hand out the helpful brochures and maps, which I highly recommend you pick up. There are over 70 miles of trails here. I'm just going to do the 1.4-mile Pueblo Loop Trail to the cliff dwellings. It begins behind this building. The trail is not an ADA-approved path, but it is paved. And if you don't feel like walking, there's another free spotting scope. Again, one is at wheelchair height. There's archaeological sites all over the place, and you're walking past them. But most of them have been left alone and are out of sight. The highest concentration is about a half-mile down this trail. In addition to the park map, I picked up one of the trail guidebooks for a couple of bucks. It has info on the 21 markers along the way. The trail starts pretty straight and flat in this little valley. It's going to take a few minutes to get to the cliffs and take the time to wonder what it might have been like to live back then. You're walking where they walked, in what was then quite a big settlement 700 years ago. I'm not going to talk about all the markers, but the first one is for a side trail. It crosses Frejole Creek, which was the original year-round water source. On the other side of that bridge, there are trails to a waterfall and to the backcountry. This is the first ruin. If you've seen the previous segments of this road trip, you know that it's a kiva, which was used for ceremonies. It had a roof back in the day and may have looked something like this fully restored one in Aztec, New Mexico, that I shot a few years ago. Kivas were used for religious rites, and it's where important decisions were made. This one was excavated in the 1930s and only partially reconstructed. By 1200 AD, the ancestral Pueblo were growing crops in this valley, and wherever else they could. For example, they made a staircase to the top of the valley, where they also grew crops. They planted corn, beans, and squash with the help of terraces and other irrigation methods to capture and retain water. They grew plenty of food for the hundreds of people who lived here. They also hunted the game in the area, and they raised turkeys. They wove the feathers to make blankets and other household items. And of course, they ate them too. The turkeys, not the feathers. This is a small section of the ancestral Pueblo village called Kawani. It is one of several villages in the park, but of course only a small fraction of them have been excavated and reconstructed. Some of the buildings had 2 and even 3 stories. In all, there were about 400 rooms that housed just 100 people. The guidebook includes an illustration of what it might have looked like back in the day. Most of the ground floors were used for grain storage, because they were smart enough to know that they needed reserves as insurance in case a harvest failed. The turkeys were also housed on the first floor. The rooms were all connected in a protective circle, which probably means there was a threat of some sort. There was a plaza in the center with several kivas. There was an opening at only one end. And this part of the trail, well, once again, we're walking where they would have walked. This would have been on the outer edge of the plaza. The design and construction indicate that the builders likely had contact with other settlements, including Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde. Even back then, they had extensive trade networks. Obsidian from the caldera has been found as far away as the northern plains. And feathers and the remains of macaws have been found here, and they had to come all the way from Mexico. And of course, they didn't have horses back then. They had to walk these great distances. At the Coronado site, we saw how they used adobe and mud bricks to build structures. Here, they used rock. They cut blocks from the soft volcanic tuff. And here, the reconstructors used maybe a little too much mortar. But you get the basic idea of how it looked back in the day. The reconstructions were done by the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Depression in the 1930s. That was a government jobs program. And unlike today when the government gives you money when you're not working, back then the greatest generation had to do things like build walls to get money from the government. I suppose that's rather appalling if you're 20-something. At trail marker 9, there's a fork. The trail to the left bypasses some of the cliff dwellings, for those who want to avoid climbing up a few steps. Or for those who just want to take a shortcut to Longhouse Ruin and eventually Alcove House. Longhouse is several stories tall. These holes were used to anchor timber beams that acted as a floor or ceiling for the higher stories. There's also a pictograph nearby, which is a painted picture on rock, and a few petroglyphs, which are harder to see. Petroglyphs are carved into the rock, but they're not painted. The rock here lacks the desert varnish that we saw at Three Rivers and the other sites on the trip. So here, they're harder to see. If you want to go to Alcove House, that's going to add another mile to the hike. And with the help of ladders, the trail rises over 140 feet, and you'll get a nice photo up there. But it's a tricky and potentially dangerous climb. In March of 2022, a woman was climbing a ladder and was hit by a falling rock. She fell 25 feet and died due to her injuries. The trail was closed for several weeks to try to figure out what happened. Okay, back to the fork. The right path goes up a bit and heads to the cliff face. And it's too bad there were high, thin clouds. They really muted the colors of the rock, trees, and sky. It's much more vibrant on a clear, sunny day. When you're near the cliff face, you can see how easy the rock erodes. Remember, it's compressed volcanic ash that came out of that caldera we saw earlier. It's called tough, which is odd because it's actually very soft, and rain and wind erode it away. The darker areas are more eroded than the lighter ones, and the really dark areas? They're holes or pockets, the beginning of caves. About 800 years ago, someone had the idea to use stone tools to enlarge those pockets into places big enough to live in. And eventually, there were hundreds of rooms here. At the switchback, I took a good look at the tuff. You can see individual grains of ash, as well as clumps of it. They say the ash was still hot when it fell here, and that heat, along with the pressure from several hundred feet of the stuff, converted it into a loosely connected rock. The stairs take us up another 40 feet or so, and once you get around the corner, there's a nice view of the village, which is about 70 feet below us now. The trail continues around what looks like an addition to make the cave bigger. Again, they used timbers for the roof and the floor beams, and those timbers help date the age of the dwellings. Without them, it would have been very difficult to see exactly when they were built. And the dwellings seem to be everywhere, but to protect them, you're only allowed to enter the ones that have ladders, like this one. Climbing the ladder with a mirrorless camera on a big old gimbal wasn't too hard, but I wanted to get up here and show you the smoke stains on the ceiling. That must mean they had quite a few fires in here, probably for cooking and maybe also for heat. It does get cold here in the winter. To me, this spot is the highlight of Bandelier, perhaps because of the impression it made on me the first time I was here in 2000. Before that, pueblos and cliff dwellings were only things that I was forced to read about in school. Back then, the book said that the Anasazi lived here, and that is no longer a politically correct term because it means ancient enemy in Navajo. So today, they're known as the ancestral Pueblo. But anyway, let's get back to my story. This place was the seed that compelled me to visit more places like this, all over the Southwest, and even the large mound builder sites at Cahokia in Illinois. It all started on this short paved trail in Bandelier National Monument. The trail continues to Longhouse and the Pictograph before heading to Alcove House. So for me, this was the turnaround point. It was time to head on back down the road. It takes about 90 minutes to drive to the Rio Grande Gorge Bridge. I had to hustle to get there before sunset. A good bit of the drive is through the mountains, and it's pretty high. I think I got to about 9,000 feet at one pass. Eventually, it gets very flat at about 6,400 feet. I pulled into the parking lot just about 15 minutes before sunset. The locals were already packing up their tables full of souvenirs, so I wouldn't be doing any shopping. I got the drone up as soon as I could to catch the light. The bridge is almost 900 feet above the river. It's from here that New Mexico is spreading apart. GPS data shows that the sides of the gorge are still moving apart every year. Only by a few millimeters, but it is measurable. This tectonic activity has been going on for a long time, and it's at least partially responsible for everything we've seen on this 800-mile-ish road trip. From the beautiful white sands of the Tularosa Basin to the Guadalupe Mountains, the Big Cave, the lava flows, petroglyphs, and even the cave dwellings. This huge crack in the earth is a reminder of the power of nature and our ability to adapt to it. Like most stops on this trip, I wish I had more time to spend here. The trails along the cliff edge look particularly inviting, but now we're heading to our last stop of the road trip. The plan is to be on top of a volcano at dawn. We'll cross one last range pushed up by the rift and drive through the ski resort town of Taos for a total of 2.5 hours through the mountains to our next hotel. Morning came very early, and there was no need for a wake-up call because the guy next door was warming up his diesel pickup truck at 5:30 in the morning. I planned on an early start anyway, so I was off to Capulin Volcano National Monument because the website said it was open at sunrise, but websites can be wrong. When I got here, I found the gate for the road to the top doesn't open until 8, so I had plenty of time to shoot the surrounding landscape, which is quite pretty and reminds me a little bit of Montana, except for these basalt cliffs. I drove far enough away from the park's property that I was able to legally fly the drone. Capulin is a typical 1,000-foot-high cinder cone volcano. It's in the easternmost volcanic field in North America, and it formed about 60,000 years ago. And what's really cool is there's a road to the top. After a brief stop at the visitor center, I headed up the paved road, which just about circles around the cone, to a parking lot near the very top. The views of the surrounding landscape, they're pretty, and they show that we're definitely in a volcanic field. There are several volcanoes, cones, and vents all over the place, especially if you look to the southwest. There's a trail to the top, and from there you can see a very large shield volcano, Sierra Grande. It was the source of much of the basalt flows like these. Early cattle drivers used some of them as natural corrals in the mid-1800s. And the history of the place doesn't stop there. The old Santa Fe Trail came through here. The volcanoes were excellent guideposts. And if you don't like heights, there's also a short trail to the bottom of the crater. But for me, the early morning view from the top is the best. It's a great place to wrap up our tour of the parks of New Mexico's Rio Grande Rift. If you're a fan of national parks, you know that many of our western parks are overcrowded and even difficult to get into. But that's not the case here, making now the perfect time to visit New Mexico before its parks are discovered and become overcrowded too. For now, these national parks are some of the least visited in the country. And on this road trip, we've seen how beautiful they all are in very different ways. We've seen how natives live sustainably in this harsh environment, using what nature provided to create homes and to leave their mark. And we've had a glimpse of how Europeans began to change that. We've seen how the Earth itself is changing, opening fissures and filling them with lava flows, and in some places, a supervolcano and its smaller cousins. We've seen them all on the uncrowded roads of New Mexico, along a giant crack in the earth you probably didn't even know was there. But it helped create everything that we've seen as we toured the parks of New Mexico's Rio Grande Rift. It took me 2 6-day trips, one in May and one in December, to shoot this video, and hundreds of hours to write it and edit it. So please push the like button and subscribe to my channel that is dedicated to helping you explore the West.